In this episode, we're talking all about mobile. In particular, iOS mobile. This is the very first iPhone. Some of you might remember it. Remember that beautiful swipe to unlock? Well, notice we have a StreamTime app on this phone. And this phone came from America. I flew over to go and get it. They were not available in New Zealand where I come from. And when we brought it all the way to New Zealand, it didn't work on our networks. In fact, you couldn't even activate the phone without an AT&T account. So the way that we got around that was we essentially opened the phone up, we jumpered a couple of leads in there with a soldering iron, we patched the ROM, and then we put it all back together and crossed our fingers that we hadn't blown the thing up, and then hey presto, we had a phone that could connect to the New Zealand networks. Then the next challenge was to put an app onto this phone. You actually had to also hack the phone because the App Store didn't technically exist for the first year or two of launch. So we did just that. We created a phone, we wrote the code, we created the app, we wrote the code, put it onto the phone, and consequently, once the App Store did become available, we made that app available to our users. Remember, way back then, we were based on our FileMaker platform, so this had to talk into FileMaker, which was no mean feat. We got featured on the front page of apple.com. We were listed under the business apps because really it was only us and Cisco that really had apps at that point for business. Everything else was games, and there were lots and lots of fart apps. They were incredibly popular. The StreamTime app lasted for quite a few years. We discontinued it a while ago because it became too difficult to maintain it on the FileMaker platform. It's 2017. We now have our new shiny desktop-based web app, and it's time for us to start that process of building for iOS in particular to begin with native. And with the new iPhone comes a lot of new challenges, but there's also a lot of exciting things that we can do with the new hardware platform, with the gyroscope, with geolocation, with the camera, with augmented reality. There's just so many things that we are looking at doing with that platform. But we don't want to do everything. We don't want to be all things to all people. So let's kind of take a look at the three approaches that we could take when it comes to building a native app. Firstly, we've got My Doppelganger. So this is an app that essentially does just about everything that our desktop app does. So a good example of that is something like Slack, because Slack almost does everything on the mobile that you can do on the desktop version. Secondly, you've got My Mini Me, which is an app that has stripped down functionality, and a good example of that one would be, say, Trello or Xero. So, it doesn't have 100% of the functionality, but it just picks a few things and does those really well. So in the case of the Xero app, for example, you can do a basic bank reconciliation. You can look up some invoices. I think you can resend an invoice, and very little else. And then you've got My Alter Ego, which is a really interesting space to be in. A good example would be something like, the Qantas, a lot of the airline ads. Air New Zealand is the same. On the Air New Zealand native app, as you approach the Air New Zealand Koru Lounge, it pops a push notification to say, hey, you're approaching the lounge, would you like to order your coffee? And by the way, I also know what kind of coffee you like. So it's just one touch and you can have that coffee ready the minute you walk into the lounge. So it's an app that has functionality that the web or the desktop product does not actually have at all. But I want to hand it over to Jo, who's our lead designer on this particular product. And she's been doing a lot of customer research, she's been doing a lot of wireframes, and she's been doing a lot of concepting and user testing in the app space. And we're very close to starting something, but I want to show you the journey so far.
Okay, so let's recap. This is the entire StreamTime ecosystem. What lives on the web page, right? So what we're trying to do is get to my alter ego, but I'm first trying to tackle my mini me, which is really much reducing it to the bare essentials and then moving it to what the phone can do best, almost like things that the web page can't even do. And out of these things, the ones that I'm moving forwards are to do, kind of obvious one. Jobs are the two main ones. Actually, those are the only two ones. Getting rid of schedules, contacts, you can use your phone contacts. It's kind of profile settings, go to a web page like you do it on Slack, and Dash is there, but because it's replaced like push notifications, so on and so forth. So these are all, this is basically to do. So the first one that I'll walk you through, it's very like skeleton, so functional. None of the magic has been added yet. It's just getting like across what we have currently on the web page here. So on the to-do, the first thing that, the main thing is the actual to-do main screen, what the user sees when they land. So if you have a to-do list, for instance, that looks like this is almost like an interactive thing. Remember, like back in the old days, we already had this because we were thinking in terms of mobile. But it's interesting because I feel that when you're logging tasks, so normally, for instance, at the beginning of the day, does your bar start down here because all of your tasks are empty, and as soon as you start logging them down, does the black bar move up, kind of like an interaction thing? Or, which is what we had before, does the bar always stay? Which means actually this is really slightly annoying, because imagine if you have like this bar always staying and you just actually want to see kind of the stuff that's up front. So
I'm just going to cut in here for a second. So essentially this goes on for quite a while, where we take a look at a whole lot of different wireframe type sketches, and it led to a kind of another discovery, which was that the way that people populate their to-do lists is really important. It's not just about boom, there's your to-do list, and you know, swiping and completing. The next challenge was actually all around how do you get to what you're supposed to be doing. So let's fast forward now almost a month and take a look at how the wires are starting to develop based on that.
So again, ignore the aesthetics. It's not about aesthetics, it's about information. So if you have it, so it is literally a sidebar that appears. I'm calling this the quick access, because when we talked about, you know, when you open Google Sheets and it appeared like tick, 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 this is what it is. It is literally a quick access on the things that you're meant to do. It doesn't mean that that's what it's called. That's how I'm treating it.
I get it. It's very simple.
And you have,
Pop into your to-dos.
Boom. Yeah, and then you edit them. That was one. The same, then I was tackling these in different ways of how to show different information. So this is in a more, because these like cards just don't show that much. This one you can say, okay, these are items, these are jobs, this is from your calendar. If you don't have your calendar added here, you can integrate it like manually and say, oh, I'm gonna. Again,
I was like Charlie Brown.
the magic word. I then thought, again, another way of showing it, but the interesting, the thing here is like, why do we have to divide jobs and items? They could be part of the same thing, so no need to separate them. And then calendar. And this is what I meant about how the calendar appears as a task. So if it says catch up with founders, it appears as the notes.
Yeah, exactly.
Clients and jobs, you manually link them to it.
This is where it gets really exciting, of course, where you can actually tap into the native core OS of your phone, and you can locate any appointments, meetings, calendar events that you might have inside there, and then pull those in as to-dos and give you the choice to actually populate your day based on what's really happening. Let's fast forward again, because there's a huge amount of work that was done before we got to a kind of a prototyping stage. And let's take a look at some of the prototypes that we've built in order to user test some of these ideas. Yeah.
Ooh, you know, we're going to show you live. Instead of the old drag and drop to do done, it's almost like swipe left and swipe right, simply because it's way easier than the dragging thing.
Yeah.
Plus, it lets us get rid of that black bar that ultimately doesn't do anything, but it only gets activated when it was like done.
Yep.
It's a lot of real estate not being used. So check this out.
This is just yesterday, sort of looking at some stuff. I don't know how well you can see that.
Yep.
Essentially, you've got kind of like done, which
Cool.
actually worked for me just then. And then that moved up. Then you could snooze it, which also didn't work for me. Hang on, here we go.
It's actually hard to operate a phone backwards. It's
It's also not quite.
like Apple know you're doing it and they don't let you do it.
Yeah, so you can. This is just looking through a few different things, but like I can expand that. I can sort of
Wow.
go back and edit it. If I get the right things.
Yeah. It's good to test that though. That's great. This app, I think, is going to be all about the lovable moments, the interactions and the little experiences that you just cannot get on a desktop that is going to make it so much more addictive. And I think that's important. God. This is very serious business, and we're starting development of the actual app in a couple of weeks, so mid-November. We hope to have something in the early new year around that area of to-dos, and also in the area of viewing and looking at your job progress and some lightweight editing on the jobs as well. So those two particular areas of functionality, and also just how we can take advantage of those native core OS functionalities inside the phone. In the next episode, Joe and I are doing a live journey discussion where we actually go right back to the very beginning and talk about that client-agency relationship and everything that we've actually kind of done and built so far. So it'll be a 20-minute recap of the good, the bad, the ugly. And so I look forward to seeing you then.